Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Higher Line podcast. Today I'm working on not having a radio voice when I say that, but I did it anyway. Like, good morning. We've got a cool dude on today. His name's Varg Freeborn. Maybe if you follow some of the circles of people that we all run in, you may have seen him at a training event, seen him do a seminar, maybe seen a video, or read something he's pumped out online, or his book, Violence of Mind. And Varg's got a pretty interesting background. You kind of are a self-described bad guy that became a good guy.
I don't know if I'd put it that way. Of course, you know, most guys that were in trouble say they're not criminals, but I was never a thief. I was never a robber. I never victimized people. I was just a violent dude. You know, I just got in a lot of fights, and, you know, and any trouble I've ever been in has been with violence. There's nothing else.
So violence isn't bad? Is that what you're saying?
It can be, and it can also be something good, you know, and I always felt like I was never someone who really looked for it, but I would absolutely finish it for stupid reasons when I was younger.
Okay.
Yeah. So like if we pulled up in the parking lot and we were teenage kids and you looked at me wrong, and then I looked at you and you looked at me, and next thing you know, we're fighting in the parking lot. I mean, you know, I started out as, you know, somebody like that would fight a lot for stupid reasons. Yeah.
I grew up with a guy like that. He's been to prison 4 or 5 times, and usually not for that kind of stuff, other stuff, drugs and nonsense.
Yeah. I never had any trouble with drugs. I never had any trouble with drugs or, you know, stuff like that. Any kind of, you know.
Let me go back and rephrase that. By bad guy, I meant a dude that was like doing bad things, like fighting in parking lots. How about that?
Yeah. So there was quite a bit of that going on, and you know, I grew up really rough, and then my family was extremely violent. They were all, you know, either convicted felons or, you know, had been locked up, and, you know, things like that. They were, you know, 1%ers, gang members.
What part of the country?
The Midwest. So I'm from Youngstown, Ohio.
Okay.
So that's where I grew up at. And, you know, in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, especially 91, 92, 93, Youngstown was per capita murder capital for a while. It was really rough. And, you know, in 93 is when I ultimately caught my big case. So I was right there in the thick of it, you know, right out there. So 93, I was 18. So everything between 14 and 18, from the late 80s up to the early 90s. And then in 94, obviously I was convicted. And then 94 to 99, I was in prison. So
go back a little bit. We'll come back to that. You said your family, you had some violent family members, 1%ers. For people that don't know what that means, what does that mean?
So my uncles, I had a large family. Probably my grandfather, his wife died when my mom was 4. So he raised the 8 or 9 kids. I can't remember how many there were. But there was 8 or 9. He raised them by himself, working at a steel mill. And so they basically raised themselves, and they all became drug addicts, drug dealers. And, you know, by 1%ers, I mean, I had an uncle that was, you know, with the largest motorcycle gang out there. And then I had another one was with another one of the largest motorcycle gangs out there. And there were, you know, several criminal activities.
These are legit motorcycle gangs, not guys that go to work as an accountant and then put on leather.
No, I'm talking about legit criminal organization.
Dudes running drugs and prostitutes and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, that's what 1%er means. That means those are the ones that are the outlaw gangs, right?
Okay.
And so, and I don't mention these by name because that's not my business, but they were. But
yeah, we don't want to talk about that anyway.
Yeah. So, but they were, you know, they were 1%ers, and I grew up around that. I grew up, you know, as a teenager going to the parties and the craziness that would ensue there. You know, all those types of things. There was a lot of violence in my house when I was young. You know, and honestly, to this day, Uh, everybody is dead now. They're all gone. There's literally nobody left. So, and that includes some of their kids too, some of my cousins. So,
just living hard lives, various things took them.
Yeah, murder. And some of them died from murder. Some of them died from drugs. I found some of them dead myself. So yeah, they all.
One of your writings, I think you talk about seeing violence like that as a very young child.
Yeah, so I tell that story in the book about the first time I almost became a murder victim, and being 6 or 7 years old and having a knife attack in the house, and then taking my mom and aunt taking me into the bedroom, and being that young and having someone stabbing through the door and literally talking about coming in there and killing you, specifically me too. That was an extremely traumatic event, but that was kind of how things went where I grew up at. Like that was, I talk about one isolated event, but these things were fairly normal, not only for my family, but for families of the kids I ran around with too. Mm-hmm. One of my best friends growing up, his dad was killed by his uncle. So his brother, it was two brothers got into a fight, and the one brother shot the other one in the front yard with a rifle.
Wow. Because
they were arguing about who was going to go to the store, drive the truck to the store to get more beer. And that turned into him killing him. Yeah. So, and then another friend that I had that ran around with all of us, his mom shot his dad, but she didn't kill him, and they actually stayed together. So, so that was that kind of violence was pretty normal, mm-hmm. in that environment. And that's what a lot of people don't. I think a lot of people have a hard time, and I'm not, I don't brag about it. I'm not bragging, but I'm talking about it because I'm trying to share a perspective that a lot of people in this community, the training community, and the law enforcement community, the gun community, whatever you want to call it, don't have this deep background perspective. And all I'm doing is trying to share it. That's why when people go ahead.
Dr. William Aprill?
I don't know him personally. I've never spoken to him.
Okay, I'm going to hook you up with him because your life is his study. He's a psychologist, and that's kind of what he's done for years, is helps people understand, which is why we wanted to share you with our listeners, understand that people that grew up in that environment, it's completely normal. It's not a big deal to punch somebody in the face, or it's not a big deal to watch a couple of people tear each other apart, because you're so, not talking about just you, but anybody that grows up around constant violence. It's like somebody that grows up on a farm and sees animals die on a regular basis. It's not a traumatic incident. It's normal. Would that be correct in my assumption of that?
Yeah. And this is what I try to explain to people, because, to continue that story, I grew up that way, had it deeply embedded in me. And then by the time, I don't necessarily want to spend this time going back through the story of, my case, but because it's out there in several different forms. But, following that adolescence, that childhood and that adolescence, then I went into, 5 years of prison, which was very brutal. And
can you just touch on it so that people understand what we're talking about, that they're listening, they have an idea so they can follow along? You were involved, you were attacked.
Yeah, I was basically corralled by three guys, and one of, they were extremely drunk, which was all testified to in court afterwards, that they had been drinking whiskey and, smoking dope and things like that for 5 hours. And that, and it was admitted that that attack was premeditated on me. So they had planned to come and get me. This all was talked about openly in court.
And how old were you at the time?
I was 18.
Okay.
I was 18. It started when I was 17, and I tried to avoid the kid for about 6 months, and then it just came to a head. So he cornered me basically at a house. There was no cell phones back then, and people don't realize that either. You used to be, when you were stranded back then, you were stranded,
Right.
And so when you have the, the lack of ability to communicate, and there's no vehicle, you could get cornered pretty deeply. And that's what happened to me. And so basically he outweighed me by probably about 100 pounds. And
Wow.
yeah, it was a significant difference there. And then he had two buddies with him, and they basically had at one point backed the car up to the back door and had corralled me into the back room. And I think had, anticipated putting me in that's what they were trying to do all night, was get me to get in the car with them and
take you off somewhere and put the boots to you.
Yeah. Or kill me. Like one of my best friends, Pat, at that time, right around that time, turned up in a lake with a bullet hole in his head. So this was a very serious thing back then. Like, you don't, people were, bodies were turning up in the river and by the railroad tracks a lot back then. So, and it was people I knew. My cousin was murdered. My one of my uncles was murdered. My best friend Pat was murdered. So this was not something that you take lightly. When somebody says, "Oh, I'll kill you," you're like, "Yeah, whatever." Back at that time in that circle of people, when somebody would say that, you'd legitimately take that serious. So when they had corralled me in there, and I had made the decision, I'm not going out that door. I don't care if there's three of you or not. And so when it was just me and him in there, and I gave him several warnings, and I had witness coached, very heavily, because I understood what witness coaching was back then. And I had yelled, leave me alone, and I don't want to fight you and stuff like that. Several times, dozens of times, probably over the course of 2 hours. And finally it came to a head, and he corralled me in the back. And when he went after my neck and, posted me up against the wall with a two-handed choke. And that's when I stabbed him. And then I continued to stab him until he stopped.
You had a knife on you?
Yes, a pocket knife. It was just a standard folder.
Mm-hmm. And you guys were like at a house party or what?
Yeah, it was a house party. Yep.
Okay.
That he was not initially at. He came there looking for me.
Gotcha. So then his buddies get involved in this melee?
They were outside with the car when this took place, which was, probably partially a calculation on my part, so that I'm not dealing with three, I'm dealing with one first. So then, after he goes down, then they come in and they're like livid. I mean, because they think obviously he's bleeding out of 23 holes by the time it's said and done. So it looks like he's been killed, and he's just filling the carpet with blood, and I'm soaked from nipples to toes in this dude's blood. It was
and I'm assuming that whole thing probably took a few seconds, right?
That took it was probably, the fight was probably, it was less than 30 seconds for sure. It's hard to tell time back then, but I would estimate it was probably 15 to 20 seconds. And by 30 seconds, he had probably dropped. It was that quick. So, which, it seems fast, but in 15 to 20 seconds, you can do enough damage that it's very hard to explain it in court. Mm-hmm. So that's what I always caution against about that edge weapon stuff, and things like that. But so, that happened, and then his friends come in, and then they realize that he just got taken out. So they're like completely freaking out, and they're threatening to kill me. And they're just like punching walls and just losing a grip, but they won't come near me. So, I just made it clear. I was like, I'm going to go outside, and I'm going to wait for the cops to show up, and everybody's going to leave me alone, And so they pretty much parted and let me go outside. And, they threatened me and they screamed, and luckily nobody had a gun, because I would have been shot for sure. But
they knew better than to come touch the
dude.
Touch the dog they prodded.
Yeah, there was no way that any of those dudes were going to get close to me. No way. As bad as they wanted to, it was not going to happen. Because they knew for sure, without a doubt in the world, that they would very likely be killed if they touched me. So when faced with that, even that in the face of the anger of their friend just getting, what they think killed in front of them, they still chose self-preservation over vengeance.
Mm-hmm. And he lived, right?
He did live. Yeah, he did live. It was amazing that he did. The medical report that I still have, he had a lacerated internal artery, lacerated jugular, both in the neck. He had a punctured lung, and he was in pneumothorax when they picked him up.
Okay. That's interesting, and I wanted to touch on that. I did read it, so I knew the answer, but for those listening, it's just like with gunshots, you don't get stabbed 1, 2, 23 times and just drop to the ground and die. Of course you could, but it doesn't mean that you do. We have a friend that was brutally murdered, a young girl, and she lived through well over 30 stab wounds, punctured lung as well when they found her. But she, the point is that those types of lacerations and cuts don't just instantly incapacitate, like in the movie where the guy gets his bowels poked and he falls to the ground and dies. So people, like you said, people can go look that up, and I actually want them to. But the point we want to get to is you end up getting wrapped up in the system. The courts didn't see it as a self-defense case.
No, it's interesting because in the whole entire process, there's 3 courts involved. There was the court, the municipal arraignment court, and then once you're bound over to grand jury, then you go to county. And then after I was released, I still continued to fight the case, even after serving my full time. And I went to a 3rd court who obviously granted me all my restoration of all my rights, and went back and reversed the negative effects of the felony.
Which is super hard to do, that you got that done.
Yes, it is. It's extremely hard to do, especially when you've stabbed somebody 23 times. So I'm extremely rare in that instance. But
so you were charged with a felony, convicted of aggravated assault?
I was charged with attempted aggravated murder.
Okay.
Took a plea bargain for aggravated assault and was convicted of aggravated assault and served the entire sentence.
5 years?
5 years, yeah. They gave me a 2 to 5, but I did the entire 5.
So from like 19 or so?
19 to 24.
Some pretty formative years to sit in a state penitentiary.
It is. And while most of you guys were out there, going to bars and having fun, or in college and, dating girls, I was studying the blade, as they say.
Yeah.
But it's very different.
Which further prepared you for your life's work.
Yeah, and because I obviously later on entered the professional world and began professionally training as a student to go back and determine what mistakes I had made, so I don't make those mistakes again, because I had decided very quickly that I was never going to prison again. And I say this often too, that I would rather die a warrior on the pavement than to live out my life in prison.
It's not a happy place.
No, and it's not that I had a bad time there. I did fine there. But I just, if you're going to make a mistake of lethal force and possibly end up spending the rest of your life there, I will choose a peaceful grave over that. Because it's just not a life worth living. It's like being dead, but you get to watch the world go on without you.
Sure.
You're dead, but you're alive to see it.
One of the biggest takeaways is you could have left, right? You could have jumped out a window, left. Not that maybe you could have in that exact scenario, but never been there. I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of young dudes, the guy I told you about, he was a total instigator, man. He would start fights with people, and I always thought it was so absurd, because one of the things he would do is he'd buy old sheet cakes from the grocery store, like the big cheap birthday cakes, and throw them at people. Just to start crazy shit. Like you could end up beaten or shot over just like what to him was having fun. So like, I think a lot of young dudes just don't realize. I saw a guy get kicked one time. A silly bar fight turned into the instigator on the ground, a guy much smaller that I'd never seen throw a punch in all the years of knowing him. One punch knocked the guy to his hands and knees. Then he kicked him in the face, broke his jaw, and the guy was jaws wired shut for a year. And I think a lot of dudes don't understand how what we look at as like, bullshit, bravado and machismo, whatever you want to call it, can quickly turn into people having like serious physical issues.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I will say, to go back to that, in that particular instance that night, I did not have an out, because if I had one, I would have taken it. I honestly would have, because I had been avoiding this guy for 6 months. And, but, when you lack mobility, sometimes, and this is something that I deal with now as a professional, primarily with women going through divorces or have exes. There are often times in life where there is no exit strategy. Someone has you trapped.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the mobility for whatever reason to leave town.
You've got somebody with you that you can't take off.
Yeah. And so there are many times in life that people will find themselves trapped by a psycho stalker, or a person who just has it in for them, and they're just a maniac, right? And like I said, most often this is a domestic situation, but once in a while it becomes, and this began as a domestic situation because this guy dated an ex-girlfriend of mine, and then when I came back into town, she came to see me. I had no idea she had been, dating anyone else. But, this is the kind of domestic situations that, as a professional trainer, a lot of times I deal with women, and helping them prepare themselves to, defend themselves against someone who may have them trapped that they can't get away from. Like, you've got a situation where you've got kids involved, and you've got a nasty divorce going on, and you've got an ex-husband or current husband who is, already been in jail for domestic violence, as a psycho. He's losing his life. He's ready to snap. He's the kind of guy that might murder a chick, And so she's got kids. She can't leave the state with the kids. The court won't let her, right, until this is sorted out. So she's locked here. And then they got a house together, and she doesn't have the money to go get another house. Like, there's many times in life where people get on the internet and they're just like, whoa, you should just leave. And you got to understand.
I was referring more to the immediate leave. But
yeah, no, I understand.
You bring up a really great point. Keep going.
But that's what this situation was overall. Like, I was stuck. I was an 18-year-old kid. I didn't have any money, no car, no mobility in terms of like getting out of the area and stuff. And because if I did, I would have, you'd have
been walking down the street is basically where you were at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I was just a poor 18-year-old kid that didn't have nothing. So
sure.
There was no way of getting out of that overall situation. So that night I didn't have an escape, but there was an escape available for the 6 months prior to that. But again, I had no mobility as a kid. I didn't have any money or anywhere to go. So I tried to join the military, and Clinton's military at that time wasn't taking GED students. So, they wanted like the best of the high school graduates and all that bullshit. And they missed out probably on somebody that would have been, a good soldier, but probably quite a few guys, but there was no escape, right? There was no way out. So I was stuck there. And a lot of people, that's why I sympathize and understand that when people, especially, people going through nasty divorces with psycho exes and stuff, when they're trapped in these situations, I'm like, man, the gravity of your situation is deep. And, this is, you're actually, and a lot of times legally being held in a situation that's dangerous for you. And restraining orders don't do anything. So, that's when, I just worked with a girl last a month that is in that situation. And the guy was just getting out of jail for domestic violence when I was actually working with her, teaching her how to handle a weapon and, how to think about this and how to approach the mindset part of it and things like that, and trying to prepare her to, possibly shoot someone that she spent 25 years of her life with.
Right.
That's a deep, deep subject, so having the background I have and having had the case that I did and a lot of the experiences I had, that gifted me this ability to go into situations like that and actually see into their dilemma and see into the unique position that they've ended up in that a lot of people wouldn't understand, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Are you, let me rephrase that. Do you have any bitterness about all of that? It's got to be hard. I had a similar situation, which I've shared before. And it took me a long time not to be pissed off. And I'm not just asking for some feel good answer, but is it hard not to wake up and be like, 5 years, man, 5 years of my life? Is it?
Oh, let me clarify that it's not just 5 years. It's not 5 years. It literally ruined half of my life at least.
Okay.
Because, you know, I lost 5 years of my young adulthood, first of all, because of this asshole person that wouldn't leave me alone. And it's 100%. I did not provoke this guy. I did not go after this guy. I actually tried not to fight. This is one instance in my life where I tried not to fight this guy. And he 100% had come in what I gave him. And I'll say that to the day I die. I don't feel bad about one hole I put in him. But it ruined my life in many ways. I will always be a convicted felon. I will always, there's been many times I can point to a time 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, before my training business took off and I was still struggling. I was working in a bullshit gun store that, like, we all know those are horrible jobs, right? And I was making barely any money, and I had this opportunity to go, I used to be a fabricator and I used to build custom cars.
Oh, cool.
One of the things that I did, one of the things that I wanted to do with my life when I was a kid. And I had actually opened a shop later after I got out and stuff like that. But I hadn't done it for a while at that point. And there was a place that built custom trailers, like trailers that have movie screens that pop up out of them, like for big political campaigns. And they hired me. They were using a temp agency to bring people in, but this wasn't a place that had high turnover and a high employee number. It was a place where they pretty much, if you're good, you got to stay. And they, had maybe a dozen employees. And they were super excited about me and my background and my fab work, and they hired me on the spot. And this would have been a really good job for me and my family at the time. And I needed it desperately, and this company was super excited. So on Thursday, they hired me, and I said, you could start Monday morning at 7:30. And I'm like, man, I go home. And at the time I was married, and I tell my wife, I've got this job and things are about to get good. Making twice as much money as I'm making now, literally twice as much to start. And then in 90 days, if they hire me on, I get like a $2 or $3 bump. Wow. So yeah, it was like a legit good job, So I go to the next day and I go to the company. They're like, you got to come Friday and fill out paperwork. So I go and, I fill out paperwork, and they come back out and they say, we can't send you to this job. And I'm like, why? And they're like, because you got a felony on your record. I said, this company wants to hire me. And I can legitimately walk into an NFA dealer and buy machine guns, lady. Like, you telling me I can't build trailers, right? And they're like, no, you can't go to this job. So I drive over to the company. I'm like, hey, listen, this agency saying they can't send me over here. And the guy was upset, and he's like, I can't do anything about it because I signed a contract with these guys. And if I break this contract, then I'm going to get penalized. And I know that's legitimate. So I had to go home and tell, my family that I had just told the day before that I got this job and things were about to change, that nothing was going to change. Things were the same because of some shit that happened 20 years ago. Yeah. Right. And so it's not just 5 years. It's every day. It's every day. And that doesn't even count the things that I had to deal with even to this day of, like, night terrors and combative sleep disorder and PTSD and like all this shit and the stabbings and things that I've seen in prison, people being murdered, watch people get killed, watch guys get raped. For 2 years after that, just waking up in a dead sleep and just, tearing shit up, fighting ghosts. Right. Like, it's not just 5 years, man. It's
I appreciate you clarifying that. And I didn't mean to make light of it, but
no. But yeah, no. So yeah, bitter. Yeah. I will. I don't care what anybody says about the Zen Buddhist shit to go to the mountain and clear your mind. Listen, man, I will carry a bitterness about this till the day I die. And that's all there's to it. And I don't actually want to let it go because, when you have a terrible experience in life and I'm talking about life shattering terrible, right? I think at a certain point, it changes you so much, it affects your life so deeply that if you ever were not affected by it anymore, that I believe you are effectively in denial. Like you have to acknowledge that something shattered your life at a certain point. Now, I still have the capability of getting up and being a happy guy. I'm a fairly happy guy now. I live a great life in Florida. I got a little, I'm on a little mini farm. I got a couple horses. I've got a good life. And the thing is it's getting better every day, right? Mm-hmm. I'm at a place in my life where I can say I would not trade my today for any of my yesterdays ever. And when you're in that position, I think you're in the best place you could be in your life. If you can legitimately say, I would not trade my today for any time in my past at all, you're in a great position in life. And that I think is the essential goal, is to be a person who can say that one thing. And so I'm there. I can say that. But, it took me 45 years to get here when I see some people accomplishing it in 30,
Sure. Yeah.
Because of the time I lost and because of the roadblocks that were put in front of me, to this day, there's times that, there are people that would not hire me. There are people that would not rent me buildings or, for business or rent me, a place to live or, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that stuff carries forever.
Yeah.
It never goes away. Your debt is never paid. So to tell me that I need to not be bitter about something that I still feel the effects of is bullshit. You know what I mean?
I didn't say that.
No, but I'm saying that's what the general consensus is when people talk about like self-help topics.
Just let it go, man.
Yeah, let it go, right? Yeah. And some people like that, like people who have had spouses or very close or children, right? They have children killed or taken away from them, early in life, prematurely. You don't just let that go. You never let that go, right? Yeah. It's a part of your life now. And so my advice is, like, if you've had some life-shattering experience like that, it's insensitive of people to say to let it go because they don't understand. But where you should probably end up is just to be able to wake up and say, my today is better than any yesterday I've ever had. And that's, I think, if you can do that, I think you're where you need to be in terms of bitterness and, happiness.
My brother just sent me a TED Talk this morning titled, "We don't move on from grief, we move forward with it."
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was I'll send it to you. It was actually a really good talk. The gal talking about exactly what you're talking about. That's, this is about you, not me, but I can relate to a lot of that. Not the same story, but some similar outcomes from you get wrapped up in the court system. And even though you were vindicated and had all your rights restored, I think you put it perfectly. Your debt's never paid.
No.
I ended up on the front page of the local newspaper a number of years ago while helping with a political campaign. And so the opponent of the guy I was helping thought, well, I can't beat my opponent because I'm a shitty candidate. So I'll attack the people helping him, which was me. So he drug up an arrest record I had from 20 years previously, which the case got dropped, but that didn't matter. It looked good in the newspaper run it. My mother-in-law calling me in tears and having to sit with clients that, wanted to know what what's all this about. And it's like, I was good yesterday, but I guess, and it's also something I never hid on top of it. That shit comes up all the time. There's people online that'll write stuff and I laugh at them. Like, a guy recently made a video about me and sent me a message that with the link said, "I'm about to change your life." And I'm looking at it like, first of all, there's something seriously wrong with you, this
Mm-hmm.
person, but like, you ain't going to do shit to me that's not already been done, dude. Have a good day, you know,
Yeah.
have a good day. But that's pretty telling of that kind of stuff. Listening to your story, my own experience, it's made me, I guess, tolerant maybe, or forgiving is probably another good word, and understanding of people. You know, I don't look at people and I'm not so judgy, because you have no idea what somebody else's road has brought them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is too, you know, it's like, and it does bother me when because people will say, you know, when you skyline yourself like we do, you have a podcast or you have a business or you put anything out there at all, people will attack you. And they say that, you know, and one of the things that does bother me that I struggle with, and I'll admit it, is when people say that I'm lying about something. Because here's the truth. Like, I'm telling you.
Can I get an example?
Like for the book, right? So you could, like, if there's an Amazon review and they're like, this guy's full of shit and his book's fiction, right? First of all, like, you're taking the worst things of my life that literally ruined my life and saying they didn't happen. So I hate you, right? You know, I automatically hate you because, like, I feel the effects of this shit to this day. So yes, it did happen. But then on the other side of it too, I'm like, you know, people are mentally challenged because they will take, like, the most, to me, we talked about earlier about how this stuff was normal, right? Like these violent occurrences and stuff. And I'll talk about, like, the most minimal of those experiences. And people are like, that didn't happen. I'm like, wow, if you don't believe that happened.
Wait, let me tell you this one.
Yeah, you wouldn't really believe, like, the things I don't talk about. So, and then I'm like, if you're in a business of especially if you're in a business of learning self-defense or teaching self-defense, more importantly, and you don't believe that things like that are actually, that you could run across somebody that could tell stories like that, like, you're in the wrong line of business, because there's more of that out there than you think. Like, this is not, I always struggle with this paradigm gap that happens between the good guys and the other side of the world. And I try to tell them that, listen, the other side of the tracks is still your town. It's still your people.
Yeah.
These are still, people are people. And there's no, like, wolves and sheepdogs and, like, you know, like, every human being has the same struggles. It's just different context and different conclusions. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at it like that, you these people that have never, say, grew up in semi-normal homes and there wasn't violence, there wasn't people stabbing people in their house and dying of drug overdoses and finding bodies of people they love, like, don't disbelieve somebody has those experiences, right? Especially someone who can articulate about it, at least, you know, half-ass articulate about it, because it's not that unbelievable. It happens every single day in every city, mm-hmm. everywhere. Like, mm-hmm. It's going on all the time. People are dying of drug overdoses. Little kids are losing their moms and dads. Yeah. You know, people are being murdered. You know, kids are growing up in poverty and without nuclear families and growing up in crime organizations. And there's, you know, secret grow operations in the house, like mine when I was a kid, or there's, you know, they grow up in the, you know, uncles dealing crack out of the house. Like, yeah. This shit happens every single day. It's not that unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And where I come from, it's actually the normal way of life. And so when somebody's like, oh, this guy's full of, you know, fiction, I'm like, my God, dude, I would love to just tape your mouth shut and take you on a tour, you know, and take you into some places that, you know, because I do frequently still go, you know, but I go back home, obviously, and I, you know, frequent places like Baltimore and stuff, and I, you know, I walk around in sketchy parts of the city, and, you know, and things like that, and I have heard even, like, legitimate, popular, successful instructors who are ex-military who went that track where they did good in school and they were all-star athlete, and then they go to military, and then they go special forces, and they, and they do this, and then they get out and now they're teaching classes, and they're like, man, I just turned on MLK Boulevard and I got all my guns out and that's a sketchy neighborhood, and I'm like,
I know what you're talking about.
Listen, man, it's not a big deal, man. It's I mean, that kind of stuff, when you separate yourself too far from that, then you have this paradigm gap that you're going to go. And this is why I say one of the unpopular things that I tell people is when I go to CQB training, whether it's me running a civilian or patrol solo based CQB, or it's, team-based CQB training that I'll go to sometimes for my own benefit. I see a lot of people in open enrollment classes who are not killers. They're not meat eaters. They're good people. They're trying hard to train, and I give them all the credit for everything they're doing. But you're not a predatory human being, and when you've lived in a predatory environment and you've developed you develop a very deep intuitive sense for these things, right? You develop an intuitive reading of weaknesses and strengths. You develop a very fine-tuned radar for picking up on things that might be off in the room. And you also become very focused when it's time to go to work and go after somebody. It's like a shark swimming for chum, right? Like you're going towards the bait, and you have a mission and you have a focus. And open enrollment people lack that very, very, very often. And it's not any fault of their own, but it's because they don't have the paradigm. They don't have this deeply tuned characteristics that build a person like that, and
which is not always a good thing, but I'm just commenting on it. It's not like we don't want to grow up getting our asses kicked.
No. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
I'm not suggesting lucky. that. Yeah. I'm not saying that. I'm just it's like we are so removed from the vicissitudes of life in America. Most people have never whacked the head off a chicken, but they've eaten chicken. Most people have never hung a deer upside down or a cow in their garage or barn and drained its blood and entrails. But they've eaten beef. Most people just are removed from that part of life, or the street violence and such. We are very much segregated our cities, where the violent parts, you stay over there. And it's not even that we by law do it, but we self-segregate as human beings. And somebody sent me a video this morning of 60 kids on the 4th of July in Philly. It would have been pretty interesting to be a fly on the wall when these 60 kids planned attacking a Walgreens, and they swarmed this Walgreens, stole a bunch of shit, broke a bunch of shit, whipped a bunch of stuff at the clerks, and all ran out. Like, there ain't 60 kids in my town that'll do that, because they wouldn't think to do it. But these kids, came up with that, and people look at it and they think monsters, animals, but they don't understand what you're talking about, that those kids probably grew up in an environment where everything you're describing is the norm.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying you think I am, but I never say that to attack people, and I never say it to like self-aggrandize and be like, I know something you don't know. Believe me, I wish I didn't know it. Right. I wish I could have, went to college and bought a house by 30 and did all that shit. Right. But to not acknowledge it is a problem. That's a problem. Right. Yeah. So if you go in there, because you'll see some guys that go into CQB training and they just take to it like a fish in water, and they're very intuitive and they're very tuned in. And when they go to force on force level, they're very dangerous in there. They do an excellent job. They're pretty, you could define them as a killer, right? They go in and they do what's up. Some people just naturally have it. and other people have developed it through the nurture, side of things, where they were raised with it, and and things like that. And I don't debate or talk about where it comes from. I just know that the nurture is the most reliable method to get it. Like, you grow up in it, it will put it in you, and that's just it. Like, not all guys. Some guys grow up in it and just recoil from it, but most of them grow up in it and they develop a very intuitive sense for danger and aggression. And so when you're talking about CQB, and when I say CQB, let me, for the listeners, define this clearly. CQB is close quarters battle. It's not team-based tactics. Okay, team-based tactics is a subset of CQB. But when you get into a fight in Circle K with a bad guy with a gun, you are engaging in CQB. When you get into a fight in the parking lot with a guy with a knife and there's cars around and obstacles and curbs, you are engaging in CQB. Okay, so CQB is quite literally close quarters battle, where you're fighting an enemy in a confined space. It's not team-based tactics. That's a subset of it in my world, right?
Sure.
But now, when you say CQB today, everybody's like, oh, team-based tactics and, team training, and like, okay. But so when I say that, that's what I mean. I'm not talking about particular. When I mean team-based tactics, I'll say team-based tactics.
Thank you for that.
So, when we're talking about CQB or team-based tactics, when guys get into the training part and the force on force part, you can really see who's focused and who has that drive and that intuitive sense and that deep developed aggression, and who doesn't, and who's like a fish out of water, right? The fish in water will flow and move. The fish out of water will stutter and hesitate and have hang-ups and glitches and just go about having a hard time. And it's very easy when you're up on the catwalk. I teach a lot of classes at Alliance, and you're able to get up on the catwalk and just watch what's going on over the entire scene. And when you have that 15-foot view down, it's very telling to watch how people develop over time. You see so many different people come through, and I'm thinking back, because whenever I do a class or take a class as a student or teach a class, I'm always thinking back to the experiences that I've been through. So people, if you would say, well, what do you know about CQB? Well, first of all, I've fought a lot of people in confined spaces, and a good many of those fights were at the lethal level, right? Not that somebody died, but lethal force was employed. I was stabbed a couple of times. I've been sliced up both of my arms. I was stabbed in my abdomen. I legitimately lost a body part from being stabbed. And I've stabbed a couple of people myself, and I've been involved at the scene of, close quarters shooting happening. And I did 5 years inside of arguably one of the most dangerous structures in the country, with the most dangerous people you could be inside there with, where people do get attacked and victimized and sometimes killed. And moving through those corridors, moving through those thresholds, you become very aware of how you approach a threshold, how you approach a blind corner, how you approach a room that you may be dark, or maybe you don't know what's going on in there, or it doesn't feel right. Like, how you move, where you put your feet, how you turn corners, getting away from the button hook and all that stuff developed naturally in there. And then I go to CQB class, and they're putting this academic terminology to these things. And I'm like, wow, this is like the easy button, like you're showing me the easy button for shit I already knew, but I didn't know how to put it. Like, I didn't know how to, you guys have spent all this time developing terminology and developing these smooth ways to do this stuff. And so for me, it was like coming into an environment where I'm like, oh, I intuitively understand all this. Like, when you say approach the threshold with discretion, like, I know what that means in my cells of my body, right? Yeah. And so when I see different perspectives of it, it automatically synthesizes into my understanding. And in my definition of developing, fighters, synthesis of information and adaptation are the two most important elements of a developed fighter. when you are able to synthesize new information with what you already know and create a more thorough set of information that you can make decisions on, and you're able to adapt to your environment and changing variables around you, that's what makes you a good fighter. It's not having a sub 1 second draw or being able to choke someone out or being able to run 10 miles. It's synthesis of information coming at you with adaptability, right? And when you are trying to achieve that fluid state of observation, synthesis, decision, adaptation, that's basically the application of your orientation. That's all of your experiences, all of your cultural inputs, all of your attachments, the things that you're willing to fight and die for, your experience, your confidence level. All of these things culminate into this synthesis and adaptation cycle, right? Mm-hmm. And so the better of a fighter you are, the quicker you'll be at reading information coming at you, synthesizing it with what you already know, and then turning it around into decisions and adapting to your environment through decisions and observation, synthesis, and decisions. So when you've lived in that environment, you've grown like in different ways, right? And then you come up to a new environment where I've got guys that are like law enforcement, military approach to training of team-based tactics and stuff like that. And I went through all of that training, and I actually went all the way up to CQB and full team CQB instructor certification at Alliance PD, and did the entire course. And I'd spent hundreds and hundreds of hours repeating those courses. And I've taken, CQB training with other systems and other guys that have a lot of experience in different verticals, right? Like Army, Marines, Special Forces, SWAT. Everybody's got these different perspectives, but the ability to see something and look for, instead of looking for the differences, you look for the similarities and then try to match them, and then you synthesize easier when you're looking for similarities and not differences. This is why I always tell people, look at what's there, quit looking for things, and then look for the similarities. Because you can synthesize faster with something you're familiar with if you see similarities there. So if you're talking about, like, if you've done some fighting with knives up close and touching each other, when somebody starts to talk about gun retention, a lot of those things are going to carry over. Like a lot of the positioning and leverage and pulling and keeping yourself out of the line of the weapon and all of those things will immediately, similarities will pop up. And then you can understand the other things you don't know yet much quicker because you can synthesize that information. And this is the approach that I take in trying to train people to fight is, it's a much deeper level of thinking, and it's a mindset issue. And we're trying to develop that synthesis and adaptation. Those characteristics need to come to the forefront if you're going to be a fluid fighter in a fast-moving, high-stress situation when it comes up.
We're not just learning mechanics.
Exactly. You have to learn how to think and observe and read information, and then process that information, and then turn that into action, appropriate action, right? But it's much deeper than people think, because they're like, oh, I need to see things and make good decisions and shoot my gun well. And it's an intuition level operation. And intuition means basically the ability to reach conclusions about something without consciously thinking about it. That's what intuition is. It's not like a sixth sense or something weird like that. It's basically just you have enough adaptive information in you already about a thing that you can look at it and understand it and come to conclusions without consciously processing. It's like if you walk up and see, a doorknob, and you're going to walk through the door, you typically don't have to consciously process, well, I need to lift my arm up about this high so that I can meet the doorknob, and then I'll have to twist the doorknob. You don't think that.
Yeah.
You just put your hand on the door and open the door, because it's you intuitively understand. Even if you've never walked through that door, you intuitively understand how to do that. Fighting can reach the same level, and adapting to a fighting environment can reach the same level intuitively, but it takes it takes a lot of reps, and arguably it takes experience, to get to the high levels of it. But you can get close with force on force and things like that. You can really push yourself to a better level than you could ever achieve otherwise. We'll say that.
Sure. You were talking about average dudes or dudettes in open enrollment classes, and I know you weren't saying anything insulting, nor is what I'm about to say, but I see a lot of guys, and I harp on them in my own classes, in other people's classes, or at the gym, or guys in match settings that are awesome shooters, and you can look at them, just to reiterate your point, and some street thug would eat this dude's lunch. And it's not because he's not a great shooter or a great grappler or a great puncher or, super strong. Some dude with initiative and that's not scared would topple that guy in 2 or 3 seconds. And I see guys like that, and I'll ask them, for example, because of anxiety I've suffered from in my own body, I see the effects of anxiety in people. I can just watch somebody's respiration and see their pec bouncing with their heart thumping, and I'll put my arm on them on the firing line and just say, hey man, slow yourself down, breathe. And like that guy that's that juiced up from just shooting in front of a group of people, or maybe having to answer questions where other people hear him, I'll ask him like, hey, if this scenario is causing you this level of anxiety, what do you think is going to happen when some person that's completely conditioned to shooting you in the face is in front of you? You think your level of composure is commensurate with that dude? Fuck no.
Yeah. So, and to bounce off what you just said there, you said 2 very important things in that statement. First of all, the stress and the stress and heart rate and physiological anxiety symptoms, right? You're absolutely right about. I agree 100%. Like, if you can't handle this, you have no hope of handling a real situation that's deadly. And what I try to say, like, people, if you ask me if I'm going to a Forge CQB class or something as a student, and I'm about to run through the house, if you ask me what's your goal right now, I would tell you my goal is to go through this entire operation and keep my heart as close to a resting heart rate as possible. Because if I can do that, if I can maintain fluid movement and fluid decision-making while keeping my anxiety at a very low level, then I know I've achieved self-control. And to me, a combat mindset is literally defined as self-control under all conditions, right? So I think that is the first goal of a newbie that wants to begin to prepare themselves for the big fight, is to practice every opportunity of self-control that they can, including controlling those physiological symptoms. One of the things that I did, I went to, I never shot combat. I've never been a competition shooter. Never shot competition in my life. Still am not interested in it. Just doesn't appeal. I'm not that kind of guy that just is like, oh man, I want to go shoot fast and shoot a bunch of rounds. And it's nothing against it. It's not my thing. But I did go because I'm a shooting instructor, and I wanted to test myself, but I was being prodded really hard by some close friends. And if somebody actually was like, hey, if you did something really crazy and just your first competition ever, show up at the Florida State Championships, I'll pay your way in. I was like, I'll take that bet, So I take my carry gun, and I show up at the Steel State Championships in my first ever competition, and I enter carry optics class. So now I'm shooting against these race guns with C-morphers on top of them and shit. Yeah. And I'm shooting, and granted, it's just Steel Challenge, it's not USPSA, but some fast sponsored shooters in there, And I got my stock 19 with an RMR on it, and I go in there and I place 5th in the state. Awesome. So I was like, I think very early when I first got there, I had the jitters a little bit the first stage, and I'm like, all right, that's time to practice what you preach here. And not care about, so you go there. And I'll give you a quick, before I go on to that second point about what you talked about, I'll give you a quick little insight into how you can stop those physiological symptoms from affecting you or becoming a thing. Sometimes you can't muscle them down, but what you can do is go back farther or deeper and go to the root cause of them and stop that, right? So if you are at a competition and you've got jitters, it's because you either care so much about what your score is and you're afraid of failing on that, or you care what other people think about your shooting, right? It's something like that. Yeah. So if you go back and you stop caring about those things at that level and you release that attachment to that or compartmentalize that attachment until afterwards, then you will have achieved a much more controlled approach to doing this shooting, and you won't be affected by the physiological symptoms of an emotional cause that is, you're attached to this meaning, to this thing. And then if we take that to a deeper level, once you use the competition for that, not to learn how to shoot under stress, but to learn how to shoot without stress. That's more of the goal, right? Yeah. And so then you can go back and say, I've accomplished that. Now let me think about going into a fight and being able to fight with a clear head rather than being scared of being killed or thinking about my family and I might not see them. Like, those attachments will cause physiological symptoms in a fight. And now you can understand, okay, I could, the same way I went back and released those other ones, I can go back and compartmentalize these attachments, because you can't get rid of them. You love your life and you love your family. But you can compartmentalize them, put them in a little metal box until the fight's over, then get them out and rub them all over yourself and cry, whatever you need to do. But during the fight, those need to be locked away, right? And so then you can control the physiological symptoms that arise from those attachments, right? And this is how it's done in the criminal world, I guarantee you, right? This is reverse engineering from the guy that you might face someday. He's had enough experiences in life to be able to put his attachments in a box and detach from those and just do the thing at hand without being overcome by fear. Sure. This is at the higher level, higher order criminals.
Same as a special operations soldier or a SWAT cop hitting a house.
100%.
Not thinking about dinner tonight. I'm thinking about the door. And what's
exactly.
inside of it.
Exactly. Yep. Release those attachments that cause those physiological symptoms. And, the second point you talked about was, you said, because I've experienced anxiety, it allows me to see the anxiety in other people. That's super golden stuff right there at a deeper level. If we think about it like this, the way that I talk about, this is why I teach people to see violent criminals as you begin as equals, and then what sets you apart is your morals, the rule of law, and training preparation. That's how you set yourself apart. But it's not like there's some other species or something. You dehumanizing them is a mistake. And it's a mistake because you separate yourself from them to the point to where you no longer have an opportunity to even understand them. And now you're losing the opportunity to understand yourself. Because just like you can think back about anxiety in myself, and now I can spot it in others, if you had conquered that anxiety and you had conquered that uncertainty in a fight, if you had done the hard work and you'd went in and talked to yourself about, the uncertainty you have and the fears you have, and then you conquer those and you do the training, you do the work, and you're able to step up to the plate, guess what you can now do? Not only can you spot it in another person, but you understand how that person ticks inside. Now you can start to get inside of them and create uncertainty and create anxiety because you fully understand what's going on in them. Mm-hmm. So because they're the same as you, they have anxiety, they have uncertainties, they have fears, they have attachments, they have desires, they have things that they're willing to kill and die for. If you don't look at them as being, this is totally, if you say they're wolves and you're sheepdogs, or, they're not like you. And
I hate that whole paradigm.
Dude. And so when you say that stuff, what you're actually doing is pissing all over thousands of years of wisdom from people like Sun Tzu and Miyamoto Musashi, and where almost every single one of them in some form or another has said to know your enemy is to know yourself, right? To know yourself is to know your enemy. Think about that. Like when you conquer these things that we're talking about in yourself, you put the work in, you're able to change your physiological condition based on cutting off attachments, either temporarily or permanently, and putting yourself in a mental space where you're in control of what you're thinking about, and also dealing with uncertainty, because uncertainty is the enemy of every fighter. It's the ultimate enemy of every fighter. Uncertainty is what causes all the problems. So when you understand how those work in yourself at a deep level, and you've done the hard work to fix those in yourself, you now have gained a look right into the heart of your enemy, and you in fighting them. So I had an encounter. I just used this last 2 weeks ago. I had an encounter with a gangbanger, right? He was a gang member. I know this because I spotted the tattoo on his neck and the specific number. I'm not going to say what it is, but I know what the number is, and I know what the gang is. I've dealt with them before in prison. And I know that it was primarily a prison gang. So he cornered me in the park, asked me for first the cigarette, and obviously I didn't have one. And then he asked me for money, and then he said, well, what can you give me? And I knew I had a problem in my hands, because this guy, was full of face tattoos. He was like, I can tell when somebody's dangerous most of the time. Like, I've been in prison. I've played cards with these guys and slept in the same rooms as these guys and ate dinner and lunch and breakfast. Sure. And,
what time of day was this?
This was midday, 3:00 afternoon, probably.
City park kind of a situation.
City park. Yep. You should have, like, a place you should feel safe, right? Like, he rolls up on me. I'm cornered in an area that I can't really get out of. And people say, you made a mistake. No, I didn't make a mistake. I was living my life. Right. And I got cornered.
Thank you for saying that. I try to remind people of that. I'm just going to throw that out there real quick. The reason we do all this is to protect our life, which if you're not living, then go get fat and die or eat a bullet, because what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what I was doing. I was living my life, and, I'm armed, obviously. I'm sitting there, and he rolls up, and we had a very interesting conversation that lasted 10 minutes. And what I think would have started as a robbery, I fully, as a matter of fact, he basically told me that he was out looking to rob somebody. And so the way he put it was, well, I'm out here and I'm messed up. I ain't got nothing. And if I got to come out here and lay somebody down, man, then that's what I got to do,
And so I told him,
I told him, I said, the way it started was this, like, before we got to that point, he's approaching me, he's pushing, he's putting pressure on me. So I stand up and I meet the pressure with the wall, right? Because I knew immediately I'm dealing with a convict, so I'd go back into convict mode, right? And so I put the bench in between us, so he has 2 moves away. Instead of 1 move to reach me, he has to clear the bench and then reach me. That 1 move before going for me gives me enough time to be able to have a reaction that's appropriate for him. So I create that extra step in between us that he'll have to overcome, and he recognizes that. And we're both still now he's exploiting my social courtesies, right? So because people dance. Yeah, no. Because people were like, "Oh, you stand back, sir."
I was gonna bring that up. So your response wasn't "back off, I'm armed. I will shoot you."
Yeah, it's just ridiculous to think about that. People don't act like that in public. Right? I hope you don't act like that in public. So, he's exploiting my social courtesies, which is what they do. And then I turn around and I'm exploiting his social courtesies now, because now I'm engaging him at his level. And I'm thinking this is it. Like, I'm obviously thinking this guy might be the one. Like, this might be the day. I'm thinking that actively at that moment. And so I'm preparing myself for battle at this point, because I think this guy's a little bit off. I think he's just pretty fresh out. His face is covered in prison tattoos, and he obviously had the deadest, like, you could have killed this guy and he could have been laying there dead and his eyes wouldn't have looked any different. Okay. So he's this dead-eyed gangster dude, and he's sitting there and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I tell him, I ain't got nothing for you. And I'm kind of cornered, so I can't really like scoot out, and I'm not going to retreat from him, right? Because like a dog, you run, it chases you, right? So I got to figure out a way out of this situation hopefully without having to kill this dude. And so I put the bench between us, and we're having this conversation, and I asked him, I said, where you do time at, And he's like, I did 2 years in somewhere in Florida. And then he's like, I said, yeah, but I said, that's not a Florida tattoo on your neck, because I'm from the North. So I know this game is primarily a Northern game. They're not really in Florida. And he's like, well, I'm from Philly. And then I'm like, what are you doing out here? So I go right to the root. I'm like, what are you doing out here? What are you looking for? And he's like, man, I'm just trying to get something, man. I ain't got nothing. I'm like, where do you live? And he's like, I'm homeless. And, and I'm like, listen, and that's when he's like, if I gotta lay somebody down, that's what I gotta do. And I was like, well, the first rule of improving your life is to not mess with people who aren't messing with you, right? Because that's a good way to get your life destroyed in multiple ways. And then I said, I did 5 years stabbing a guy a couple dozen times, so I know what you're talking about, right? And I'm sending him a message at that point, right? I'm telling him, like,
I'm not the fucking guy that you want to play with today.
Yeah, because I'm in Florida, and I'm enjoying life, and I dress, I got like preppy little dock shoes and some shorts and a super bright colored shirt. I look like the typical white dude, like, sitting on a park bench doing white guy stuff, and not that it's just a thing, right? So
I'm following.
He rolls up and he's like, and I'm like, nah, bro, this isn't suburban Joe here. Like, this is a different thing, and now I'm talking to you convict to convict, and I let him know before I left. Like, I finished my conversation before I left. You understand? Like, I did not leave that conversation until I had taken the position. When I was in the position to make the call and say, now I'm dismissing you, then I left the conversation.
Checkmate.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had to have that conversation with him. And then I also took the opportunity to kind of like, say, you're going to end up back in prison, or somebody's going to put a hole in you if you continue to do what you're doing, And so
it's actually very, very compassionate of you, because you could have, that story could have gone a little different, where you could have been like, he could have said, make me, you could have shot him. Cops showed up and you said, look, this convict tried to rob me. And you probably would have been A-okay, especially in Florida for it, especially with what he looked like. You showed great compassion.
Yeah.
It's really,
and it's, it's not, I can't say what I really think, obviously, because, that's for me personally. But, did it bother me to walk away knowing that he's still walking around? Yeah, I'll say that.
There is that, but we're not judge and jury.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and people are like, you missed the opportunity to stand up for America. And I'm like, listen, man, I'm not Captain America. Like, I have a family that I need to take care of, and I need to get back to. And my mission that particular moment was to make it out of having a coffee and a cigar in one piece, right?
Yeah.
And that's all I was doing, sitting by the water's edge, trying to have a cigar and a coffee and enjoy a peaceful day. And this guy, jacked that up for me, and it pissed me off greatly. And I was extremely angry with him. However, I was still able to act with, at least some professionalism towards him.
Not to tell you how to think about it. I look at that as if it was a perfect validation for all that you've been working at.
I see it.
You didn't have to take. I know you see it. I'm just making sure that people listening understand it definitely wasn't. It actually is a more badass act than shooting somebody.
Yeah.
Pretty easy to pull a gun out or even flash a gun than it is to now engage in an intellectual conversation with somebody and talk them off of that ledge. And I think the cool takeaway for people is this kind of ties back into what you said a moment ago. We are different, but we're the same still. That dude just wanted something to eat. He's got no plan, and you showed compassion and empathy and was like, hey, man, I get it. Probably gave him the best advice that anybody would, because a cop or anybody else would just tell him he was a shithead. And that's really the epiphany of the warrior code. It's that you don't have to fight. It's that you talked about, my brain just went blank.
Musashi and
or even the Knight's Code of medieval times. The point is that standing up for those that needed it, but also not having to fight when it wasn't necessary.
Well, that's the truth. And you hear all those stories. They talk about those stories where, like, the young swordsman comes up and challenges them, and tell them, they'll say some witty shit that makes them realize, like, you shouldn't do this. And that's basically what you're trying to do. Like I try to be like, listen, you're 20 some years old. I get it. But, I've been at this game for 44 years, bro. And I had put 25 years in back in the day doing, the other side of it. So, I'm trying to just be like, get myself out of the situation, but also try to do something good in the meantime. Like, like maybe, and I left it, he was just, the condition I left him in was funny because he eventually gives up and he sits down. And then I knew, like, okay, I've achieved the position. Now I can disengage from this conversation, right? Like, he sat down, I'm standing up, we're done here,
Yeah.
And so he sits down, he slumps, he slouches, he relaxes. And then I said a couple more things, and then asked him a little bit about his life. And then I was like, well, I hope life gets better for you, bro. And I walked away. And he just sat there with his shoulder slumped, just staring at the water, right? When I was walking away, he just stared off into the water. So who knows what he was thinking, right? Maybe he won't go and do nothing else, or maybe he will and somebody else smoke him. But that's not my problem at that moment, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what, that's where, instead of, like, if I was like thinking the whole time, like, oh, this is a wolf and he's like, he's a dangerous animal, and I'd be like, stop, sir, you gotta get back, don't get close to me. And I wouldn't have been able to manipulate that situation, right? And because I understood how he worked and how he thought, and I've dealt with his kind many, many, many times for day in and day out for years on end, I understand how he ticks. Yeah. And it's not always guaranteed, but I have an answer for when it's not guaranteed too. But I'm going to try the first route of manipulation. And I manipulated him, and I manipulated that situation, and I exploited his social courtesies that he was using, right? I tried to dominate the situation, but in a very tactful, manipulative way, which is the code of how that works in that side of the world, right? And a lot of things are gained, through, like, people have this misconception about prison that, like, people just forcefully rape people and, people are always getting beat up. Most of the victimization that happens inside of a prison, I would say 95% of it is done through intimidation and manipulation, right? And intimidating and manipulating other convicts is not an easy thing. Like, you're going after people who are obviously tuned up, and they're manipulators and thieves and crooks and con artists themselves. And so when you put those tools together, like iron sharpens iron, right? And then you come out of that situation, and it's like force on force camp for mindset, right? You're just constantly training mindset in a real application situation. Mm-hmm. And so when I roll up on somebody like that, like, I automatically am like, my brain is searching for patterns. I'm looking for patterns so that I can kind of type this guy so that I can get inside of his head, because I understand what's going on inside of him, right?
Yeah.
He's not that different than me, and he's just experiencing his emotions and his reactions to life in a different way than I am at this moment. But because I've been in a similar situation, I can see it the way he sees it, kind of.
Now, let me throw something out there real quick. Now,
go ahead.
My wife in the park reading a book is not going to be able to pull that same masquerade off, or your wife, or my 18-year-old daughter, or even Joe Schmo the accountant, because he doesn't have that same life experience, and you don't learn that stuff showing up at shooting classes.
No, you don't. That's why I try to teach mindset so much, because the problem faced with an experienced person trying to teach people without experience something like this. How do you get that unlocked in a person? You can't, without sending them through those life experiences. You can't cause that to happen in their brain. However, if they can at least acknowledge that, okay, these people have uncertainty and anxieties and, desires, and they have all the same things that we have, right? Like, and I just need to kind of understand, what's driving his, so that I can kind of work this situation. It doesn't mean that if somebody grabs you, you need to manipulate that. That's a fight. And we're talking about a fight at that point. And you stab, you shoot, whatever your answers are at that point. You've trained to do jiu-jitsu, whatever. That's when you apply that. But up until that point, you need to know how to psychologically deal with people. And, one of the first things I tell people is that if someone's probing you, which is what he was doing, we call probing, right? He's probing the boundaries to see where the opening is at. If someone's probing you, he hasn't committed to attacking you yet. And this is where you posture enough to just let him know that this isn't, I'm not, and this is the difference between posturing in my world and posturing in the novice world. Posturing doesn't mean like, hey, step back, you're getting closer. Like, posturing is like,
this was all nuanced.
Yeah, it's very nuanced. But the main message I want to send someone when they're in my space is, I want them to know that I'm super comfortable with you being in my space, bro. Like, you don't even know how comfortable I am with you being in my space. You know what I mean? Because I'm extremely dangerous. And if you're in my space, you're in danger. You understand? Mm-hmm. So if you're that confident in your skills,
why do you think
that
I walk around with my sleeves rolled up, bro?
Yeah. But you do that. But here's the trick. Here's the trick is like sending the message without the sleeves rolled up, right? Like, that's what we try to do, is like
throw some levity in there.
No, I know what that, and I know where you're going with that. But the problem is that while you're kidding, we know that people out there do that, right? Yeah. And the mistake that you're making is that, a real predatory experienced person sees that as a weakness. I see that as a weakness. If you're fronting all the time, like, and you're putting some macho thing out in the front all the time, I know that you're afraid of something, right? And it's because I've had the opportunity to watch people in a very dangerous environment where they're going to get tested over and over again. And that projection over deterrence stuff is, if it really worked, like, there would be no prison violence anymore. Like, because everybody's jacked and everybody's dangerous. They would just bump chests into each other and keep each other off of them, right? Yeah. But that stuff doesn't work, because the predator is going to find a way in. And what you find out by being in environments like that is that the loudest guys and the guys with their chest poked the most out are typically the ones that have the most fear, levels of fear. And so that's an in. It's the same way with a cop. When I teach cops, and I'm like, listen, if you're the cop that's like, get on the ground, shoot your head off, I'll your face, you get up. Or you're the cop like pointing a gun at them saying, listen to the sound of my voice and do exactly what I say and don't do anything else. Which guy scares me more? Mm-hmm. The guy who's talking calmly, I know will shoot me, right? The other guy might shoot me on accident, but he's out of control. And I know if I wait, he's going to make a mistake because he's already out of control. But the guy who's talking calmly and pointing a gun calmly at me without shaking is in control, and he's pointing a weapon at me. So those two things together are super dangerous. that kind of stuff sends a stronger message, right? So the biggest deterrence that anybody achieves in that predatory environment is the deterrence of being unpredictable. That's more of a deterrent. And if I'm unpredictable, it's hard for you to formulate a plan of attack.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to.
I can't see his fangs. I don't know where he's got them.
Exactly. Whereas if you're open carrying, or you're big and strong, and you got your sleeves rolled up and you're poking your shit out, like you're showing, you're giving data that allows them to formulate a better plan. There's a thing that guys would say in prison is, the bigger his arms are, the harder I'm gonna hit him from behind, right? And it's really, there's so much wrapped up into that little statement, like
it is, man, that's deep.
The bigger your arms are, the harder you're gonna get hit from behind, and it's true. And like
give me 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead.
1 second. The other deterrent that I have, it's these. Check it out. My other deterrent that keeps them away from me. I am the antithesis of tactical. The antithesis. Yeah.
They don't know whether you're gonna run or you might want to have sex with them. They don't know.
I actually have literally told a guy one time, I was like, back up or I will. I literally told a dude that at a party once when we were kids.
Yeah.
That was always one of my ways of diffusing things. Let's have some fun. Just relax.
Yeah. And that's the I don't know. Yeah, we could
You were talking about I will hit bigger the arms, harder I'll hit them from behind.
Yeah, and if you listen to, like, I post, I use some interviews in my classes. There's a channel on YouTube called Truth Witness channel, and they have some excellent interview videos of convicts and gang members that are just spilling the beans because they're obviously defecting from gangs and looking for protection. So they're like giving law enforcement everything they can, and it's valuable stuff because they say the same exact things that I'm saying. Like, one of the guys in particular in one of those videos talks about, he's a Nazi lowrider, and he talks about, it's not a matter that the selection process isn't a matter of, if I will or not, it's a matter of how. And the more and the more information you give me up front, the better my planning can be. So, and I talk about this with cops when I'm training cops and working with law enforcement. I say, even though you have lost the ability to conceal your tools, you still have not lost the ability to conceal your intentions and capabilities. And to me, concealment is concealing tools, intentions, and capabilities. That's true concealment. Concealment is a field craft. It's a field craft. It's an actual field craft all in itself that you can become. If you have any operator fantasies, then you should work to become a civilian operator that is undetectable, and you can conceal your intentions, your capabilities, and your tools. But in terms of like being practical about it with cops, that, I tell them, there's different ways that you can approach it. If you practice going from, your hand resting on the top of your gun in a front knuckles forward, not master grip kind of way, and then your other hand resting on mags or your radio or whatever you got on the left side of your belt, it looks like you're just relaxing. But if you've practiced getting master grip from that position super fast, and because your hand's already touching your gun, but you look relaxed, so you could be concealing the intention to draw that gun and the capability of being able to do it super quick, while you're appearing relaxed and appearing unpredictable, because they don't quite know what you're going to do. You're not jacked up and you're not projecting strength, but you're also not scared and not projecting anxiety either. And practicing that concealment, even with your tools hanging all over your body, you still can practice concealment to a high degree. And that's where we get into the art of ambush, counter ambush, where I say that, the definition of an ambush is a violent attack launched from a place of concealment by surprise. Your counter ambush can effectively be a literal ambush, because your counter ambush can be an unexpected attack launched from a place of concealment. And that's what your counter ambush should be. You should be practicing concealment to such a level that they don't expect the level of force that comes back at them when they launch an ambush. And achieving that is a deep mindset function, because it's very, very difficult once an attack has been launched in your direction to just immediately respond to.
I got a buddy that's an undercover copper for years, and he always says in his combatives talks, if you try to touch me, I'm going to touch you 10 times as fast and 10 times as hard. And people think that he's saying like he's like a badass, but what he means is like, if you try, I am physically and mentally prepared. You hit me once, I'm going to hit you 10 times, and it's going to hurt. So don't touch me.
Yeah, counter ambush has to be kind of an attitude like that. So, what we get into there is when you're practicing concealment, like, another interesting thing about concealment is that it continues throughout the fight. So if let's say I've locked up with a guy, and you see this happen a lot in force on force classes, or any classes where they wrestle over guns and stuff like that, where they'll go to the weapons very quickly and get stuffed, and then they're fighting over the weapon, right?
Yeah.
You learn very early on, if the stakes are for real, you learn very early to not do that, right? So I need to conceal that I have a weapon until I've developed the opportunity to clear the weapon and strike, right? That's when I want to bring it out. So now I need to work towards that opportunity. So I'm going to create a blind spot for you, or I'm going to position myself somewhere, but I'm always going to I'm fighting to keep you from touching that part of my body, to feel it. And I also want to create the opportunity not only to get it out, but to get it out and strike in one motion, right? I want to get at least one strike in and start your clock. So, and when I talk about retention and concealment during the fight and surreptitious draws, I practiced all that. When the guy caught the blade an inch above his heart and sunk 4 inches into his chest, that was conducted from a surreptitious draw, right? When I was caught up against a fence one time, and I had 3 guys kicking the shit out of me, and I had a knife in my back pocket. I went to the knife too early. They saw it, and now I'm fighting to keep my hand as deep in my pocket as I can, to keep the knife in my pocket, because they're trying to get the knife and they're trying to get my hand. And now I'm in a totally situation that I've created, because now I've got to fight to keep it in the pocket, which is not where I wanted it, right? I'm actually shoving my hand and locking my elbow to shove my hand to the bottom of my pocket, and then I'm sitting on my hand, on my ass, on the knife against the fence, just taking a beating, because I need to lock this thing to the earth, And then I had to fight my way to, I create a bubble in the fence and just roll my body around as I draw the knife to protect the draw. And then I get the knife out and everybody scatters, and I save the day by chasing them off. But this shouldn't have happened that way, right? Because I could have been in a very bad situation. So when I teach these things, I'm teaching them from, hey, don't go to the weapon too early, because I deeply understand why you shouldn't do that. And this is what's going to happen. And we need to create the opportunity to draw and strike, and not just draw, because you don't want to draw and then just fight over a weapon. So concealment continues throughout the fight. You sandbag, you change. I give guys this example. I'm not a jiu-jitsu guy, but I have done it. And I've done it enough to know that you go in and you go up against white belt or blue belt, or even some purple belt, and the higher the belt goes, the faster those guys wrap you up. Because as younger players on jiu-jitsu, you feel someone shift, and you start to learn, like, when you feel them shift, they're positioning for something. So I got to shift, or I got to take that leverage away that he just gained, right? Like, he's gaining some kind of leverage, he's gaining some kind of position, and I need to move to take that away. You learn that very quickly. The reason that the black belts can do it on you is because they will shift and sync the movement without shifting ahead of time and signaling to you that they're shifting. So what they're actually doing is practicing concealment for the movement that they're about to make. Their intentions and capabilities are concealed until they have enough of an opening to move and then sync at the same time. Because a novice is going to scoot, and try to, and be very overt about where they're trying to go. Whereas the real seasoned player is going to be more like chest and wait, try to push you, possess you, nudge you, and then they're going to just move and sync at the same time. And they've practiced concealment to where you can't detect it early because they're not giving you those early cues. So when I talk about concealment, it's at that very deep level of, intentions, tools, and capabilities, and it continues throughout the fight. It's a field craft that you practice all the time. It's a very deep topic that I take, extremely deeply. I'm actually writing a booklet on it. My second book is on orientation, and that's in the progress of all this mind stuff that we're talking about. But this little book that I'm going to bust it out in the meantime, it's probably going to be like 100 pages or less just on the topic of concealment, how I talk about it, because
very cool.
It's brought over from the criminal world, and I think it's highly developed. These people have been, people, and me included, practicing concealment from a very early age, whether it's concealing yourself from, drunk or drug addicted family members that beat you and abuse you when you're a kid, and you have to learn to conceal your feelings or conceal what you're about to do, or just find ways to move around the house without being detected, all the way up to, the people that are smuggling drugs and weapons into schools and, hiding from the cops or running, they've been practicing concealment since they were young, and it's a highly developed art by the time they're adults, whereas the average good guy hasn't heard the word concealment or thought about it until they took a CCW class, and they think it's, you type in concealment on Google or on the YouTube, and you're going to get how to hide a gun with your shirt,
Yeah.
And that's just, so I want to take the topic into a very deeper level in terms of fighting and dealing with criminal violences.
On that topic real quick, before you take it down a farther road. So I'm assuming you don't carry a Glock 34 in a appendix holster with an RMR and a medium t-shirt where it looks like you've got a bag of groceries under your front shirt.
Yeah. Like I've got a tumor.
You don't walk around like that. You don't teach your students to do that.
No, I'm a minimalist. For several years, I carried a 19 with an RMR, but no weapon mounted light. I have a separate light that I carry in my pocket. And it's very small. It's not a big 1-inch tube light. I carry a pin light.
Me too.
And well, that's good. I'm glad that someone else does, because people are now taught.
A little 150 lumen stylus, it's called, from Streamlight.
That's what I carry. Yep.
Little SIG, 13 round SIG P365.
Most of the time in Florida, I'm carrying a Glock 43.
Yeah.
And I'm very comfortable. I shoot that 43 as well, if not better in some situations than the 19, believe it or not. It's just that when I put that gun in my hand and I shot it, I was like, wow, this gun just works for me. So I know my 7 rounds count. They count, and I feel good about that. And do I feel like I'm underarmed? Most of the time, no. If I'm going to do something like, I deal in cars and I deal in, trade and stuff. I like horse trading and stuff like that. And there's times here in the forest where it's sketchy, and you can go back into the forest pretty deep here on some dirt roads, some narrow dirt roads that you don't have any cell phone coverage. And it's pretty, like, you could end up in a swamp out here. So there's times when I roll out there, I'm carrying 150 rounds on me, but when I'm just out average day, I'm a decent, suitable weapon and a good concealment holster appendix for me, and I'm happy. I'm good. I don't feel like. But here's the thing:
you know how to use it, and are able and mentally prepared and capable to deploy said weapon.
Yes, and that's the thing. I can hit whatever I want to hit with that gun, and I know that. I go out and I regularly work with that. When I got the gun, the first week I had it, I put 500 rounds through it, just getting acclimated to it,
Yeah.
And and that's, a lot of people have the different views about, oh, you should carry the biggest gun you can carry and stuff like that. And I get it. I understand. And if you're okay with that, I like to be, I like to have a high level of comfort. And here's my perspective. Here's why I feel this way. I lived a life for 25 years of violence, and I was involved in many, many fights and many lethal force level incidents, and several blade fights and several times with guns. And 5 years of prison and lots of violence there. And then one day I decided not to do it anymore. And for over 20 years, I have not had one conflict with another human being. And so if you want to know the true magic is having the mindset and the awareness and the highly developed skill sets to be able to avoid the bad situations, but also be prepared when the unavoidable ones happen, right? And having been in like tons of shit and then for 20 years not to have anything,
pretty telling.
Yeah, and there's a lot wrapped up into that, and it's more than I can get into in this podcast, but there's a lot wrapped up into that. And so the basic gist of it is what you carry in your mind is more important than what you're carrying in your belt, and that's going to get you there and back 99% of the time. That thing in your belt is there to get you out of a situation.
100% agree.
Like Chuck Pressburg says, there's guns to get you into gunfights and there's guns to get you out of gunfights. I carry guns to get me out of gunfights.
Yeah. And of course, those listening, if you're a cop or you have some sworn duty to protect the public, that's a completely different dynamic than us average Joes that do not have to run into a gun battle. And I feel like I've been talking about this a lot in my writings and postings and trainings lately. It's this bastardization of training. It's almost like in the 80s when every street corner had a karate dojo that opened up. And like by every 10-year-old that went after a year was a black belt. And it's like the same thing now, where you can show up to all these training classes and learn how to be a warrior with your concealed carry chopped up Glock. And you check these boxes of 11 million candle power flashlight ×2, check. Chopped up Glock, check. Cool pants, check. Cool belt, check. It's like that's like we're looking at that's all cool, but it's not cool. But it's a completely bizarre phenomenon that we've created here.
Here's what I always think about. I think about this. I'm like, okay, let me take your pants and take your shoes and take your gun and take your knife and take your med kit and take all your clothes off. Let me
go on.
Let me shave your head.
Go on.
And shave your face. Shave your head and shave your face. You're going to be baby face. Then I'm going to make you camp. Then I'm going to make you bend over and spread your cheeks and make sure you got nothing stashed up there. Then I'm going to put you in a jumpsuit and send you into the cage with all the other wolves that you talk about. And let's see where you go. Let's see how you do. Right. So, and I'm not talking about attacking people for what they do, but I'm just saying, like, if you think you've achieved a warrior status, can you strip off everything that you identify with and still go in and be that, right?
Yeah.
And if your answer is no, then you've got some issues you got to work out. And me, you could strip my weapons and drop me in any city in the country, and my chances of survival are probably much better than the average person.
Sure.
And it's because what I carry in my head is what really matters. That's what the weapon is,
Yeah.
And it's not, and once you realize that, then you don't feel like you have to carry as much weapons because you're carrying the main one.
I've got a lot of friends that come from the highest echelons of special operations, like the highest places in U.S. special operations. And those guys wear T-shirts and flip-flops and maybe a 43 and a folding knife and, a couple cigars in a shirt pocket, and let's go. And
that guy's extremely dangerous like that.
He might have, most of those guys in their trucks or their SUVs have other things in there because they're smart. They've got jumper cables and a medical kit, and they've got a case of water on the floor of the back seat, and they've got those things, but they're not tweaking out. Do you know Dave Spalding from Ohio?
Yeah. Oh, Dave
tells a story where he goes out to Applebee's or whatever after a class with a bunch of students, and one of the guys, first all the guys fight to get the position at the table so that they have the commanding presence. And then one of them has to use the pisser. And this guy, he says, stands up and does this freaking like Batman walk through the restaurant, like Applebee's in like Toledo or wherever. And pieing himself off around columns and making this big show that he was Johnny Tactical. And when he came back, like Dave said something to him, like, tone it down. You're making us look like we need to be shot, like stop it. But, and we're not bashing on anybody. I want to make sure people understand that. But if that's where your head's at, you got to think a little deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting you bring that up because when I talk about that kind of stuff, I want to just mark it backwards and say, if the shooter entered the room in Applebee's, what guy do I want to be? And ultimately, I want to be the guy that comes out of the woodwork from nowhere that you don't even see coming. That's me. That's me. Mm-hmm. That's the position I want. So even I'm okay if I end up in a restaurant where I'm not facing the door. I'm okay. Because first of all, the guy could already be in there.
Yeah, he could
might not come from the door.
Right.
Yeah, you don't know where he's going to come from. First of all,
wait a minute. That's exact. He's got to come from the door because that's what we always planned.
Yeah. When you get in enough situations, you start to learn that plans, like preparedness, is better than plans, right? Like preparedness to deal with unexpected situations is not a plan. It's a state of preparedness, and it's plans are looking for things to happen, and they prohibit you from looking at what is happening. And so the way that I talk about it is stop looking for things and start looking at things. It's the same way with newbies going into a house and they go into a room thinking they're going to see a specific thing, and they don't see that thing. They see something else. And then that creates a mental train wreck in their head, and everything, all progress stops for a second. And that's the gap that you get killed in. So planning is, it's a way of, what I try to caution people to do is let's look at procedures rather than plans, right? So I have a procedure for if I'm stopped somewhere in my vehicle and I'm engaged, like there's a procedure, right? And there's a procedure if it comes from outside, there's a procedure if it comes from the passenger side. You think about different lanes of attack, different things. So when you're sitting in a restaurant, it's not just standing and watching the door. You think about, just real quick, run through your head. I have a procedure for getting my family out of here. I have a procedure for hitting that kitchen door. I have a procedure for hitting that front door. And you just have all these different procedures available, but there's no plan because you don't know what's going to happen. So you can't plan for you don't know. You have not enough information to formulate a plan.
Had this conversation. You probably get questions from folks. What about this? What about that? And a guy asked me a question. I'm not insulting him if he listens to this. He says, "Hey, I'm traveling without my wife with my two sons, 13 and an 8-year-old. What should I be thinking about?" And I go, "Well, in context of what?" He's like, "Well, danger." And I said, "Well, dude, we could literally talk until the day we die in 60 years about like what you could do." And I go, "What do you want me to like say? Like if you're at the mall and this happens, you do this? Yeah. Like this is like it's." And I think people get caught in that trap of, "Look, Varg, I'm not going to grow up like you did and go to prison. I'm never going to learn all the things that you learned. So just give me the like cliff notes here so I know what's up." It doesn't work that way.
I'm always like, listen, if you're in the food court and you start engaging a guy and a second guy pops up, and then you find out that aliens are attacking from the rear, right? And then there's a team of ninjas that have been deployed, right?
Not the ninjas.
Yeah. So this is where this goes. And I tell these guys, I'm like, if we go down that road, we're going to end up talking about aliens attacking and how, um, the best weapon to combat aliens would be a 7mm Mauser for ballistic reasons. It's ridiculousness, right? We just get into talking about that's ridiculous because
Tactical
the rest of it sounds as ridiculous as talking about why a 7mm Mauser is the best thing to shoot aliens with. Like it all sounds the same to me. Yeah. So what we need to talk about is procedures, train to the procedural level. So the way that I train, and I used to call this levels of stacking fundamentals. And then I ran across Chappie, and I learned a ton from him. He mentored me for a long time, and his way of putting it was skills, procedures, or skills, techniques, procedures, capabilities, tactics. And I kind of changed it a little bit, and I do skills, techniques, procedures, and just pretty much let's cap it there for the average civilian or patrol cop, right? Tactical planning is you're in the briefing room and you're determining where the doors are, where you're going to hit it. Are there any dogs in the yard? Like, do we have the presence of any children? Is there any toys in the yard? Like, that's tactical, right? As a civilian, you're not really going to be at that tactical level in most situations outside of home defense planning. And then I would caution against being too tactical there and being more procedural. And the difference is procedures can be employed on demand to respond to arising situations, whereas a tactical planning is to achieve an objective by whatever means you need to get there. And that's a very different thing. It's a tactical plan is very inflexible in many ways in terms of objective and things like that. Whereas if we're thinking in a procedural level, we can employ different procedures on demand and have those basically ready on tap. So
if X happens, I got Y. If A happens, I've got B.
Yeah, exactly. And so now I have, and you don't get into that thing where you have too many options because it's just very simple. The things, they kind of flow together, So if your training is appropriate, your procedures will flow together with each other, and it won't be like, it's not like a kata where you go and you learn a martial art, 1,000 katas, right? You got a couple of things that all operate off the same principles, how you move around a vehicle should be very similar to how you move inside of a structure. Like, how you deal with obstacles in cover and concealment shouldn't matter inside, outside, those things are all transfer over. So it's not like you're creating this 1,000 Marriott, buffet of choices, but you do have some procedures and you just understand how to operate procedurally. And then that's why, like weapons flow, being able to move around people was my biggest pet peeve. Being able to move around people without a gun pointing at everybody in full control of the gun. In my training in my classes, I start every class that I do out with weapons flow training. Every single class starts with weapons flow training, and we just work on movement around other people that don't need shot with a weapon, because it's my biggest pet peeve.
We do a lot of that in our courses as well. I get a lot of people that catch a video of something and they're like, these people are insane. Of course, we're not doing anything unsafe because the people have trained to do things safely, but it's insanity how people fixate on cardboard target, straight lined, and ability to move.
Once in a while, and this is very, once in a while, I'll get suckered into going out to the range with someone that I'm not in control of. Like, I very rarely let that happen anymore. Like, I don't go to public ranges and I don't go shooting with friends and stuff like that. But once in a while, you find yourself stuck where these people didn't pay you to come there, but you're on the range with them and they're not doing shit that's, so this week I actually ended up in that situation where my buddy that I shoot with, he's like, hey, I'm going to the range. You want to come on? I'm like, yeah. So I get there and I find out that he's got a couple family members there who are older and set in their ways, and they're walking around with, he's walking around with the 1911 and it's cocked and it's not locked, and he's got his finger on the trigger, and the gun's just waving everywhere. She's waving guns around, and I'm like, oh my God. And then I'm thinking to myself, this is representative of what I've seen on public ranges. I used to work at public ranges, and this is representative of what I've seen in a good many cases. If you have those kind of tendencies and those kind of that kind of etiquette and mannerism with a weapon in your hand on a sunny day on a range, I can only imagine the danger you would be to my family if you jumped out with your gun at Applebee's.
Hell yeah.
And so that's why I train that really hard. Like I'm very big on what I call advanced safety, and pushing the ability to intuitively move with a weapon in your hand and be able to chase a target or hunt a target or, achieve target acquisition without muzzling your teammates or your fellow officers or other people in the public.
Makes good sense to me. It's such a, it's a pleasure chatting with you. I've never got this much time to speak with you one-on-one, and we've covered a massive amount of stuff, from your life to what you've learned and some of your philosophies and ideas on training. What kind of cigars do you prefer?
Rocky Patels are always a good bet, right? But I actually enjoy flavor infused cigars, like especially coffee flavor infused cigars. Oh. So like Javas, like my big relaxing pleasure in life is to have a cup of French pressed coffee, fresh ground, with a Java infused, cigar.
Double down on the cafe, huh?
Yes, man. That's my big, I'm not a big drinker. I'm not, I rarely drink alcohol. I don't do any drugs, but fresh pressed coffee and a Java infused cigar. And that's my addiction, man.
I dig it. How do people find you?
So I've got multiple websites. I'm on Facebook and Instagram mostly. I have a main website, vargfreeborn.com, and that's like a portal to see other stuff that I do. My training website is violenceofmind.com, which is linked in the main website too. So I'm basically out there everywhere. You guys, I've got a YouTube channel, I've got a Facebook, and I've got an Instagram, and everything under my branding is now under Varg Freeborn. So you can find me by going there. My company is One Life Defense. Yeah, my company's One Life Defense, but I've changed my branding, all of my branding over to Varg Freeborn. So that's it.
Good call. I appreciate your time, man. I always like to ask folks this. So some of the people that are listening or watching, depending on the platform that they're catching this podcast on, may never get a chance to meet you in person or ever even hear the sound of your voice again. That said, if you knew you may never get a chance to cross the path with that person again, what would you say to somebody? You only had one moment in time to share something with them.
I guess the biggest message I would probably hope to send out into the world is that, life is there's a lot more important things in life than violence and hurting people and defending yourself and things like that. So it's good to be in this community. It's great to be involved in self-defense and get things going. But my biggest piece of advice is to not allow it to consume you to the point to where you forget to enjoy this life that you're supposedly supposed to be protecting. And if I see you on Facebook at any time of the day, literally some of these guys, anytime you log on, they're arguing about grip stippling and sights and this and that. Who's taking care of your family and who's touching your wife's hair? Because it ain't you. And so if you're not living the life that you're supposed to be protecting, then you should probably check into that and maybe rethink a couple things, because the important, meaningful things in life are what's sitting in that living room or sitting in that bedroom while you're thinking about stippling your Glock and if you should chop it or whatever.
Well, the folks that listen to me hear that same speech from me constantly, so it was a pleasure to hear it from you.
Yeah.
I think those are wise words. Guys, I appreciate that you spent this time with us. Do a favor for Varg, since he took the time, and go give him a follow on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, hit the subscribe and like button. Share it with your friends. Share the knowledge that this guy gleaned from a lifetime of both good and bad that he's now using to help us. Share it with folks. Put the podcast up on your Facebook page, on your social media account, and let other people hear this stuff that maybe you'll get them thinking about something that they are looking at funny. On that note, tell somebody you love them.
Buy the book.
Yes. Buy the book. Violence of Action. It's
Violence of Mind.
Violence of Mind. Sorry about that. I was reading my notes here and read 2 words. It's a good book. I've read it. Next time I see you, you're going to have to sign my copy. Where do they find that?
Yes.
Is that on Amazon?
Amazon.
Is there like a Kindle version of it and all that jazz?
It's paperback and Kindle right now, and the audiobook version is coming very soon. I will be reading it myself.
Oh, very good. So they can hear your smoky voice.
Yeah. So it will be read in the absolute sexiest voice in the self-defense industry. So
I love it. I love it. Guys, I know that those of you that listen to me all the time disagree with his last comment about the sexiest voice in the industry, but whatever. we got to give him something. He's had a rough life. Be kind to each other. Don't be a dickhead. Be well. Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com.